John McMullen live at the NovaCare Center today, where the Eagles wrapped up their final portion of the OTAs for this week, and then the next week is the next week's the mandatory, and that will really be the final time we hear from the Eagles until training camp, right? There's nothing really after next week's OTAs, the mandatories. Then this is the one time a year after these OTAs that football kind of goes on hiatus.
That's correct, but let me just correct one thing. Tomorrow, Friday, the Eagles have an extra day of OTAs, and that'll be open to the media. So Doug will be talking tomorrow, along with the 3 days next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, which is the mandatory mini camp, and that's the kind of stuff that Fletcher Cox and Darren Sproles obviously have to show up to, or they can start being fined. So that's going to be the big storyline next week.
Sure is. Let me start with one quick question. The third-round draft pick, Isaac Seumalo, will he be at the mandatories? I know his schedule at school, he has one of those extended semesters out there. Do they plan on having him at the mandatories?
No, he won't be here till training camp, and that's understood. The NFL understands that rule. A number of Pac-12 schools out west have the quarter system. Byron Marshall, remembers, also not here, the running back wide receiver from Oregon. And those guys are not going to be around until training camp, but that's an excused absence. So the Eagles understand that, and they realize that those guys aren't able to be here.
John McMullen's with us. The Eagles OTAs continue today at the NovaCare Center. You wrote a piece about Nelson Aguilar, and I want to get into him a little bit. I watched his interview on the Eagles website where I kind of left impressed listening to what he had to say and some of the things that he really hit on. And he seems like, and I want to get your opinion on this because you were around him last year and have been around him so far now. He seems like a guy who has matured a lot from year one to year two.
Yeah, he really has. That's what stuck out, is the confidence he showed. He was kind of a typical young guy that when everyone would gather around him, you have these media hordes, and he would put his hood on, or his eyes would go down to the ground, and just not used to dealing with that type of situation. And now he's holding court in front of his locker. He's got the good eye contact. Everybody answers every question. Didn't make any excuses for how poorly he played last season, understands it. But there's one thing we can't measure when we talk about NFL players. We 40 times strength, all that kind of thing, route running. Nelson has all that, but the one thing he didn't have last year was confidence, and it kind of manifested itself. The drops started. He started disappearing in games, and now he comes back. And he's got this whole new personality and confidence, and it's certainly a positive development, as positive as it can be, at least this time of year.
John, what are some of the things, he might be more mature, but what are some of the things that you see in him that suggest that he could have a big year?
Well, Pete, the first thing is he is that confidence, and the fact that even when you see him in individual drills, he's out there snatching the ball. He just shows a different guy, and he expects to have success. And a lot of times, when you have the physical talent, that's the last part of the equation. We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, it's not going to manifest itself for real until September. But at least after last season, as I wrote, if you look at, I think there were 121 receivers rated by Pro Football Focus last year who played enough to be rated. He was 121 out of 121. That's how poorly he performed last season. And he looks like a completely different guy. He bought a jugs machine in the off season to work on catching the football. He's always been ahead of the game as far as a young receiver when it comes to route running, and that comes more into play in this offense than it did in Chip Kelly's offense, which was just about tempo and try to force the defense to make mistakes. So I think all of those things trend positively for Nelson.
John McMullen with us on 97.3 ESPN. So, John, you mentioned a lot of the other wideouts, Randall, Givens, T.J. Graham. Do you see a better wideout core as a group as a whole?
I do, and it's not great. but at least you have guys like Randall Givens specifically. They're not NFL. They are NFL receivers, and they're not Des Bryant. They're not all pro level, but they belong on an NFL field. You didn't necessarily get that feeling last year with a lot of guys the Eagles were sort of jawing out there, and it's going to be different. As I said, no one expects Ruben Randall to catch for 1,000 yards or Chris Givens to be a 60, 70 catch guy, but it is an improvement over what they had last season.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. He covers the Eagles. You write the piece about the self-assured Aguilar who plans a major step forward here. It's a good piece for those of you who are wondering about Aguilar. And I'm wondering from you, John, you talked about how he seems more mature. Pete just asked about, and that was Aguilar who mentioned, in that interview that, hey, we got, just the way he presented it was like, we got Ruben Randall here. We've got Chris Givens and TJ Graham. The question that was posed to him was about such a young core, and he was like, no, we've got some veteran guys here. I thought that was pretty eye-opening in that this guy appreciates some of these other guys around him, and I wonder, you have Aguilar like this. Where's Jordan Matthews at in year number 3? How far has he come now? Because he kind of is going to be the veteran out on that field. He's going to be the one guy who's going to get the most playing time, you would think, of all the guys, and his role seems like it's changing a bit.
Yeah, and Jordan is the one guy that they kind of look at and say that's a given. So he's obviously the number one receiver on this team. That doesn't mean he's a true number one when you want to compare him to A.J. Green or Julio Jones or players like that, because he's not. But on this team, he's a proven commodity. He's caught a lot of balls over the last 2 seasons. And I think he's going to be more effective this year because you don't know where he's going to be. If you play the Eagles and you were a defensive coordinator over his first 2 seasons, you knew where Jordan would be on every play, and that's in the slot. And with Doug Peterson's offense, he's going to get to move around. He's going to play outside the numbers. He's going to go from the slot, and they're going to look at particular matchups each and every week and try to get the best one to get Jordan to have success. And that part of it is where he's very excited because every receiver wants to be an outside the numbers guy who can make big plays down the field. And I think finally he's going to be given the opportunity to do that.
And one of the things, John, that Nelson Aguilar talked about was this offense compared to last year's. He didn't talk too much about last year's, but seemed to stress this one.
It's funny, though, real quick on that, John and Pete. He seemed like well, he didn't talk a lot about last year's. It was for a reason. Like, I don't want to get into what happened last year.
Right. The past is in the past. It just seemed, though, also that he said it's going to be more game planning for what the defense does. Do you think then that'll help the wide receiver core? I mean, are they taking a new strategy or just reinforcing what it should be?
Well, they're taking a new strategy, and this staff is reinforcing what they think it should be. Now, you can argue for both sides. I mean, there was something to Chip Kelly's philosophy and to try to speed up the defense. I mean, you can't take away from the fact that this was a top 5 offense for 2 seasons. So it's not like they struggled consistently. They were able to pile up yardage. It didn't necessarily always translate into points. But you can make arguments for both philosophies. But as far as the players, they can't help. They do put that caveat on it, and they say, look, we don't want to talk about last season, and then they'll sort of change course, and they'll say, but we're very excited. You can see it's just because there's more on their plate. It's more of a traditional football environment, especially for a guy like Jordan Matthews, who was such a high-volume receiver at Vanderbilt in college. Now he's going to get to move around instead of being pigeonholed, and that's exciting for players like him. Doesn't necessarily automatically mean he's going to be more successful. It's just something that he prefers.
John, and he mentioned Randall, who's not here, which is a little discouraging. Obviously it's so early, but just to get a sense of how he's going to kind of fit in. Where do you see behind Aguilar and Matthews? Do those, because you said a couple times about, for instance, McKelvin, that looks like he's far and away the best guy at that position. Do Matthews and Aguilar look like they are the clear best 2 guys at their position?
Well, they do so far. But Reuben hasn't been there. He was there for the first practice, hasn't been there for the last two that were open to the media. So I think he's in the equation, and probably just because of his history in this league and the fact that he's a veteran, knows how to play, he's probably ahead of Aguilar if he's healthy. But the hope is Nelson could eventually become that second receiver. That knocks Reuben down to number 3. And then you start talking about Chris Gibbons probably outplaying Josh Huff at this point. And we go from there to some of the more unknown receivers, guys like Caleb Jones, who's a big, lanky, undrafted free agent that I think has a chance to make this team. But, it's not great as far as talent goes with that position. But as I said to Pete, it is better than it was last year, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking to improve, and I think they've done it at the wide receiver position. But they still have a ways to go. There's no question about that.
John, let's talk about tight end a little bit, specifically Zach Ertz, because we all know in the Andy Reid offense, a.k.a. the Doug Pederson offense, tight end very prominent. So is Ertz excited about his new role since Chip Kelly seemed to rarely use the tight end?
Yeah, same thing, same philosophy. You mentioned Doug Pederson, Andy Reid. Obviously, before him, they have a history of using the tight end quite a lot. Zach sees that. He had a lot of success under Chip Kelly, though, also. But what he didn't have was consistent success from week to week. And you would see those large spikes where he'd have 2 catches, and then all of a sudden he'd have 13. So I think what he's looking for this year is more consistency from week to week, to know that he's going to be in the game plan and he's going to see the football 6 or 7 times every game, and he's got a potential to be one of the best pass-catching tight ends in football. And I think if you look at the Eagles as a whole, you have to look at Zach Ertz and say this is probably one of their best 5 players.
Hey, how about then Selleck? I mean, the last couple of years, we've been waiting for Ertz. They drafted this guy in the 2nd round. I mean, hey, come on, 2nd-round pick. Let's get you involved. And it seemed that Selleck was constantly, getting the bulk of the playing time, or more playing time than fans would have liked. Do you think this is the year we see more of Ertz rather than Selleck?
Yeah, and I thought that kind of happened last year. I think Zach played more than Brent for the first time, but it's difficult because what Brent gives you is he's a true wide back, a true inline tight end. So he can block, and he can also catch the football. That's been the weakness of Zach Ertz's game since coming out of Stanford. He wasn't asked to block all that much in college, and it's been difficult for him to get that part of the game down. And he still is improved greatly, but that's not the strength of his game. But he is so good catching the football that you have to have him on the field more. And I think this is one of the strongest positions on the team when you look at having Zach and Brent, and also Trey Burton. And don't sleep on Chris Fanchel, because he's the fullback on this team. So basically you're going to have 4 tight ends, and they're all going to be, I think, impactful to what they do offensively.
Fullback, you brought up fullback. I looked at your article.
PT's
the other
eyes
day.
lit up, by the way, when you
I
mentioned the
shot
fullback.
Straight up in my
Fans all over the Delaware Valley love to hear fullback.
No, I just thought at one point as a guy that spent 10 years.
No, I'm not kidding. People like the fullback.
Yeah, it's a good football position that I thought was phased out of the game, John. That's my question. How is the fullback back in the conversation? I thought there wasn't a fullback in the NFL anymore.
Yeah. It is phased out in a number of offenses, obviously, including Chip Kelly. So you didn't see a fullback, but Doug goes to that Andy Reid offense, and they do use a fullback. Not a ton, but you'll see in Kansas City, Anthony Sherman played about 200 to 250 snaps. So they're going to be out there, especially if a running back gets hot. So if Ryan Matthews is running the football well on a particular Sunday, all of a sudden you're going to see more of a guy like Chris Panfield, because you want a lead blocker. And it's, as I said, you're going to see 11 personnel, which is 1 running back and 3 receivers more than anything else. And then it's going to come to 12 personnel, which is 2 receivers and 2 tight ends. But there is going to be a fullback in this offense, and it is going to be used at least probably 20 times a game. So it is going to be a back in play in Philadelphia. Some people like it, some people don't. We'll see how it works out.
Oh, I think a lot of people yearn for the fullback. That's a Philadelphia position right there. You know, get that guy out there, the old Kevin Turners of the world, get them out there. Anthony Toney, have him catch a couple passes out of the backfield. And, when you look at this offense, it's funny because 2 years ago, famously, Kansas City had no touchdown catches from its wide receiver. They had Jeremy Maclin to that mix, and that went up. And as Pete mentioned, the tight end out in Kansas City, Kelsey, was a prominent figure out there. Is this team's identity a run-first offense, or is it going to be a passing offense? Because, quite frankly, they don't got Jamal Charles here. They don't have Charchandrick West, who had a great year last year. There is no definitive back, which Kansas City had.
Yeah, and I think they would like it to be a run-first offense, but what you would like and what you can do are two different things. And you mentioned the fact that there is certainly not a Jamal Charles here, and that's not changing anytime soon. So the hope is that Ryan Matthews can stay healthy and play 16 games and give you a 1,000-yard season. And maybe if that happens and everything breaks correctly, it does become a run-first offense. But if his history comes up of injuries and he's not able to stay on the field and you have to rely on whether it's Kenyon Barner or Wendell Smallwood or Darren Sproles at 33, touching the football more than you want him to, all of a sudden, out of necessity, it's going to have to turn into a pass-first offense because if you look at least on paper, the best skill position players on this team are Zach Ertz and Jordan Matthews.
Yeah, and you're right about that. I agree that Zach Ertz and both those guys, I think, have been underutilized, at least during the Kelly era. And that's something I want to kind of go back to, too, what Pete asked, and then I was interjecting there that Aguilar seemed like, I don't want to talk too much about last year, but what he did kind of say was something about, hey, Pederson is calling plays based on what the defense is showing. We're game planning for their defense. He kind of indicated that Kelly just called plays regardless. He didn't care what the heck the defense was doing. You run my play, and in Kelly's mind, it would work, right? Is that kind of the indication you got when Aguilar was explaining what he's explaining, that Kelly just cared, just run my play? Pederson's calling plays based on what the defense is showing them.
Yeah, it was kind of a backhanded shot, but I've been screaming it from the building tops for 2 years. Chip Kelly didn't game plan for what the other team was doing defensively. He had a core 7 to 10 plays. It was all about, it was basically Mike D'Antoni's version of 7 seconds or less, and Chip Kelly was 10 seconds or less on the football field. It was about getting up to the line of scrimmage and running the play. When you're doing that, when you're running each play so speedily, so quickly, you don't have time to worry about where the Mike linebacker is or what kind of coverage you're looking at. You're just running the play, and that's what Nelson was talking about. He was telling the truth. I've been saying that for years. I don't understand, and it's not an insult of Chip Kelly. I just don't understand the people who think he had this massive offensive playbook. His whole philosophy was being simple and forcing the defense to speed up so they would make mistakes, whether it be lining up wrong or not getting the right substitutions in the game or not being able to substitute at all. They did not game plan for specific defenses.
Well, we wouldn't have a conversation with you, John, if we didn't talk about the quarterback position. I know that John DeFilippo said he's been pleasantly surprised with the number 2 overall pick, Carson Wentz, and his development. What to you stands out about Carson Wentz so far?
Well, I think his skill set stands out. He does have the big arm. That's as advertised. He's the frame is there, and he's got room to grow into it also. So one thing, you look at Carson and Sam Bradford, because obviously Sam has the pedigree of a former number 1 overall pick. The one thing you look at him is to say Carson looks like he can handle the punishment a lot more. His frame is more impressive. He's just put together better physically. And that's one of the reasons the Eagles liked him, is they feel that he's going to have the ability to take the punishment in the NFL and bounce back. And we'll see how that shakes out. But there's no question from a measurables standpoint, Carson Wentz has everything you need to be successful as an NFL quarterback. Now you have to see where his default settings are when the real bullets are flying. Does he? One of the things I always look at is the eyes. If the pass rush is coming and all of a sudden the eyes go directly to the ground and they don't stay downfield, that's a dead giveaway that this guy's not going to be very good. But we're not going to be able to see that until we get into real competitive environments.
John, by all accounts, this is Bradford's job. But if you think that if there was an open, legitimate quarterback competition, do you think Carson Wentz could or would win that competition?
He could. Would he? It's interesting, open, competitive environment. I think it is open in a standpoint, but I think it's more to do with a rookie quarterback. Not necessarily does he have the ability to be a starter, because I certainly believe he does in this league. It's just, do you want to speed him up to that point and let him take the hiccups on the field, or go the Aaron Rodgers route and sort of sit and learn? The Eagles have stated time and time again their preferences for the latter, and they'd rather have him redshirt and sort of learn that way. I'm not sure that's the best way, to be honest, because I think the one position you need live repetitions to get out better in this league, no question, is quarterback. So I'm in a camp that thinks you should fast forward to the future as quickly as possible. And if he's got the ability, and he certainly does, to start week one, you might as well get to the future. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do. That's just my philosophy.
Yeah, and if the season ends up being a lost season anyway, then did you hold your quarterback back a couple of games? And I guess that's what pressure Sam Bradford has on his back. Don't make it a lost season. Hold the kid to the bench and make them make a tough decision. He's John McMullen over at 97.3 ESPN.com. He's got more on the Eagles OTAs. And, of course, next week the mandatories will start. John will be there with full reports all week long. And, of course, follow John at JF McMullen on Twitter. And for all his national coverage of the NFL, check him out at todayspigskin.com. Thanks, John.
And the voice held up. Rejoice.
Hey, good job. Good job.